Welcome to the AZ Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Hamid Shojai. Let's go. All right, what'd you think of that?
That was good. That's
All
great music.
I'm here.
It had a funky vibe. Like, it was good.
Yeah, that's good. I'm here with Kelly Smith, founder and CEO of Prenda. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Hi, Hamid. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Prenda, you gotta. Well, let's start there. There's, your background, by the way, is so amazing. You've studied nuclear physics. You've been way into education. You've created this company that I'm an investor in. So we'll start with Prenda.
Yeah.
But we got so much to talk about.
I'm excited. Let's do it all.
Okay.
And thank you, by the way, for investing.
Oh, get out of here. First of all, obviously, thank you. but yeah, let's go back. What is Prenda?
Yeah, so Prenda helps people run micro schools. This is a group of 5 to 10 kids that do school in a house or a community center, some sort of informal space. It's got this small group dynamic where kids get to be creative and collaborative, but it's got this academic rigor as well. We use technology to sort of allow kids to learn the basics and do it at their own pace in a way that makes sure they master material. And in the process, the mission's to empower these kids as learners. We want them to see anything in their life that they want to learn as this great challenge that they can dive into and accept and embrace and do the work of being a learner. So it's in some ways, it's a way of doing school. We'd like to think bigger than that. It's a way of helping shape learners, which are going to go out and, build the next, the future of humanity. So all these great things that we get to see these young people do.
Yeah, I love the mission. So COVID obviously had a huge impact on your business, right? But I want to go back to before you started. What got you to think about these sort of micro schools? Is this where you started, or did you sort of experiment with a bunch of different things before you landed on a micro school type of?
Yeah, so it's important to say I wasn't really looking for something. I've always been entrepreneurial. I want to be in the ecosystem. I think you and I met before any of this idea even landed. So I was definitely around and learning what was going on in the software industry. I had left graduate school and did a whole career in technology. So I was mostly product management, product marketing, a little bit of engineering, some of those jobs over a career. I got to a point where I had sold a small software business, moved back home. So I had lived in Boston and California and Wisconsin for jobs, and I moved back to Mesa. So I'm right here in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, and living it here. I had some time. I was working remotely for a company that acquired my little startup. And I started teaching kids computer programming for fun at the library.
Nice.
So basically, it was my kid was 8. I had always said every kid should learn chess and computer programming, just as a way to practice your brain, your brain skills.
Right.
And
stimulate your brain.
Definitely. So we had been playing chess. My son was 8 years old at the time, and I said, well, it's time to learn coding. Let's go. And instead of doing it just at home with the two of us, there was an empty computer lab down at the library. I put posters up in the neighborhood around the library that said, come learn how to make a video game for free, and I still remember walking around taping those to light poles.
Okay, so what was the motivation behind getting other people in on that?
Yeah,
rather than just focusing on your kid, there's an intrinsic desire to teach others, it seems like, inside of you, right?
That's probably true. We could get real psychoanalytical. I don't know if I thought of it that way. It was sort of, I'm going to be doing this anyway.
Right.
I know we were at this library a lot. I knew that there was an empty computer lab there, and I thought, it might be a great opportunity to, in the process of helping my own kid kind of get a leg up on his future, hopefully help some, and as you and I both agree on this, learning how to code is a great idea, right? Even if it's just for getting a job, you're going to be able to get a job and get lots of jobs and be economically secure. So that was kind of the thinking, was maybe some of these kids will wander in off the street. They will take to coding. They will pursue it, go get jobs in software development or similar fields. And in fact, it's now been 8 years since I started that. So I've gotten to see some of these kids grow up. And
nice.
There was a day, just these meaningful days when you're involved in helping young people where some parents came up to me that I didn't remember. They hugged me. I was literally eating like a burrito at a restaurant. And they just said, our son is majoring in computer science, and he didn't know about it. We don't know about it. And And I'm thinking,
Like if it wasn't for you, they would have never known.
That feels like way overblown for me to say, but like thankfully we had done this and done it in a way that opened the doors to the community, and this kid got an opportunity. He was plenty capable, by the way. I remember this kid. He just figured it out really quick, and all the JavaScript tutorials, he was teaching me stuff, So it wasn't about me, but it's this idea of creating a space for that learning to happen, and that was always meaningful to me. And I don't know. I think that's probably a connection point to everyone in education. Like my grandparents were educators, my aunts, and school teachers in various education settings. So it's something that feels good. You like to, help other people. And
this reminds me of like the sort of notion that talent is distributed evenly throughout the world, but opportunity is not. And like you created an opportunity for this talented kid to flourish, right? I mean, that's essentially what occurred. And so what are the steps that led after that? Because you're still doing some of the coding stuff too. Or
we still have it, yeah. It never was a great business. So basically it started as a volunteer activity with no organization. So I was a library volunteer. I'd wear like the badge, library volunteer Kelly. And I was, we're doing that for a couple years. We ended up building a nonprofit. So we said, well, maybe we can do this in other libraries and starting that going. So we organized this nonprofit. We were giving away resources to other libraries saying, hey, here's how to do coding for your library. And what we found is everybody involved in libraries wanted to do computer programming. People saw the vision, but they would never do it. It was like they needed a little bit more help to get it off the ground. So that's when we kind of like wrote the software. We made it as basically foolproof as we could, right? Have the kids come on Tuesdays. They sit down at our software, which will like walk them through, learn how to code. And you, as the adult in the room, we will do like a training program for you so you know exactly how to be that kind of loving, caring adult. And many of those people, which is interesting, didn't know how to code. So these are librarians with English degrees. And they bravely got in there. They did know how to love kids and create an environment of curiosity and learning. And so the combination of those things worked really well.
Nice.
We found, like, speaking of this, we got a grant from the federal government to do this in like small town libraries all over America. And one that was most rewarding to me was in a place where my grandfather's parents grew up in like southeastern Oklahoma, and we got to do a series of code clubs in these little towns that there's not a lot of like economic activity going in some of these places in America. And it was cool to be able to say, look, learn how to code. The internet is here. You are just as qualified to get a high-paying job right here in your hometown as anybody else in the world. It's a cool promise. It still is true, and we got excited about the mission. As a business, we started trying to sell this to libraries, and I think this was around the time where I was like considering quitting my job. So I had a day job that was very cushy. My wife will tell you it was a very comfortable place to be, and I was thinking, maybe we could make this work, like getting involved with. It was a stretch. Like I'm looking back, trying to figure out how we did it. And that one of those years, we got our tax return. It was like we made $34,000 or something in a year, and I have 4 kids. So we, wow. It was like I don't know how exactly.
That's almost below poverty, right? Like with
it was a stressful year, I will say, and huge. Obviously, I think it's been addressed on this show before, but the partners of entrepreneurs, deserve at least as much of the credit of just being there and supporting this process, because obviously I couldn't have done it without her and doing this all together. Chasing something that was meaningful to me from a very deep, like personal level, but it wasn't at all obvious that it was a good like business. It actually was obvious that it wasn't a good business. We were selling $2,000 worth of software and training to a public library. It took months or maybe a year as a sales cycle.
Right.
And there's not that many public libraries. So the whole market, if we got everybody, was like $10 million, we could totally do.
And it's a decreasing number of libraries, right? Because everything is online now.
Right. So these guys are all having their budgets slashed, and they were feeling that pressure. So business-wise, terrible. Mission-wise, great.
Right.
That was the background of that. And we met through that. I think your wife took your son over, and we got to hang out and do some coding at the library together. Then, so I don't know if you're ready to move on to the rest of it.
Actually, before we move on from the nonprofit, you said the nonprofit is still going.
Yeah, so we actually folded it into Prenda, so
it's
it
part of
became part
the-
of the company.
Gotcha,
And
gotcha.
even before we started doing micro schools, like that existed.
Okay.
I think it's still doing a couple $100,000 a year in revenue. It's
Okay.
It's grown from where it was, but still, yeah, small business and
Okay.
have a
And
little team doing it.
And then how did you pivot it, into what Prenda became, or like how was Prenda born from that?
Right. So it kind of happens gradually, but you know how these ideas sort of land and distill upon you. The realization was basically that what we were doing wasn't actually about coding. I thought it was because I thought, well, coding is where we started. We call it Code Club. But when I watched what was happening in these rooms, it's kids who are struggling at school. A lot of them had bad grades or behavior problems. Many of them expressed to me a feeling of being dumb or limited or somehow not capable of success in an academic setting. And then I would watch them code something, so you can see their brain go because they're figuring it out. They're reading things. They're trial and error, piecing things together. They're asking good questions. They're doing this learning process. And the projects that they made were awesome, right? It was like nothing wrong with your brain failing at school. Like, what is going on? Like, why is this a problem? And how can this be different? And so for these kids, it started getting me thinking, what would it look like if an environment like we had at Code Club were to be the main education for these kids? So that was like the sort of starting question as I started exploring and thinking about what it was that we were doing there. And we can dive into all of it, but there were things that we were doing almost just intuitively, the way I learn and you learn as adults now, that had baked into the Code Club setting that were not present at all in kind of their day-to-day traditional education setting. So
Right. One of the things you said that the kids were like feeling like they couldn't do the work at school or whatever, it reminded me of imposter syndrome. It's like everybody has this imposter syndrome, including kids, obviously, but including highly successful people. Like, do you suffer from imposter syndrome? I feel like I suffer from it, but I
think everybody, it's real for everybody.
Right.
I mean, now here I am as, CEO of a company, and there's so much every day I'm running into a situation.
You feel vulnerable.
Absolutely.
You actually mentioned vulnerability is part of Prenda's culture.
Absolutely.
Was that a secret sauce of bringing these kids into an environment where they can actually, put their vulnerabilities on the table?
Yeah.
And
this is what's so great about it, right? At Code Club. So you're there to make something cool for your friends. There's nobody that's evaluating you. There's no sense of I have to, or there's no assignments. I would write up on the whiteboard, challenge of the day, and I would draw a little picture and I'd put bullets. Here's some, 5 requirements for what your project should do if you want to do a project and compete on challenge of the day. And then everybody who did it got to present their project up on the big screen and explain it to their friends, and all the other kids are playing your game that you made, and it's just intrinsically rewarding,
Right.
It feels great to do that, and so I'm watching that happen and seeing how that works, and the only way that happens is if a kid can get to a point where Brene Brown uses this phrase armor, you show up with armor, and until you can
take it off,
remove it, and be sort of your actual self, you're basically limiting yourself in terms of forward motion and progress. And if our goal is to learn more than even anything else, you have to show up that way. You have to start with a place of openness, vulnerability, and recognizing, for me to learn something, I have to not know it right now. And that's terribly uncomfortable, and humans hate it. I will say about kids versus adults, kids are more comfortable with it than adults. Or it takes less time to deprogram them. We do the same thing for our employees, and the goal in our company is to be a place where it's totally fine at any moment to not know something, and the thing that's not fine to do is to just sit on that and be okay with not learning it, right? So what you do is, I don't know this, I'm going to learn it. I ask good questions, and you're never ashamed for asking a question, and kids pick that up quickly. When they trust you, right? When they see you as an adult that's vested.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
We're going to jump from thing to thing. You mentioned Brene Brown. Is the TED Talk that she gave, is that how you got introduced to her?
I'm trying to remember how I became acquainted with her work. Probably a TED Talk or a Netflix special
Yeah,
or something.
she's got. I think she came to this sort of limelight because of a TED Talk that she had given, where she just totally like talked about her vulnerability. And I'm not even sure if it may have been a like TEDx talk initially, and then later she got invited, but it just blew up from that.
Yeah,
and
it struck a chord.
She's such a great storyteller as well.
Absolutely. Well, and she's right. She's saying something that's true, and I think appeals to a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you're like, okay, this same model could potentially be applied to, every subject, not just coding.
Right.
And you're thinking, okay, there might be a business around this, right? Or like, what are you thinking? Like, because
I don't know if I would have used
it's
the
still
word business.
education. Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, at what point, by the way, did you like pitch us, or like I remember you?
It was around this time.
Okay.
I actually, so there were 2 early rounds of fundraising. So one was when I realized this, 2017. I realized that this was possible. I said, I think we could create an educational environment, a micro school setting, a table about this big, with a small group of kids sitting around it, feeling safe, right, connected, loved, supported, and then together from that place of safety, tackling huge challenges, right? Like setting a big goal. Like, I want to be a NASA researcher, and I'm going to start right now as an 8-year-old on like learning everything I'm going to need to learn. So that includes math and reading and writing and all the basic academic skills, but tons of science, and you're learning all these things. The question was, can we put that together? And I got so excited about it that I pretty impetuously, especially if you ask my wife, I think it felt very sudden. It's like, let's do it. And my son was in a 5th grade class at the time, a traditional school in a nice neighborhood that, where we live in the suburbs. The school was perfectly fine. The teacher was a nice guy. He was disengaged. He didn't see learning the way I hoped he would see learning.
Yeah.
And so I pulled him out. I talked to some friends.
When you say he was disengaged, you're talking about your son.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Initially, I was thinking the teacher was disengaged, but yeah.
Gotta be careful with my pronouns. I can't speak to the engagement or disengagement of this particular teacher. There's so many good people in education, and I think sometimes we get misinterpreted as saying something critical or negative about. Look, what we're trying to do is create these settings where learning can just flourish, where it can take off, and that hadn't been the experience of my kids at that point, and it varies, year to year and situation to situation. The question was, can we do that repeatably, predictably for lots and lots of people?
Yeah.
And so that company-wise, with that idea in mind, I did go to some friends. In a way, they came to me. We were at several of my friends from high school do these get-togethers, and so we'd all graduated in Mesa, and some of them went to be doctors or finance people, and they said, you really need to do this. Like, I can tell you believe it. And so I think all of us sort of vaguely hoped that it was a business, but there wasn't a very clear evidence yet at that time. I had done 4 years of Code Club, but I didn't really have, I definitely didn't have credentials. For example, I didn't come from an education background.
You only had a master's from MIT, but okay, well, in nuclear physics.
You would think, it's a different skill set, right? We're doing something very different.
Yeah.
And,
you didn't have education background.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it wasn't an obvious bet, but I think because of these things that I had learned, like firsthand, just spending time, I calculated it out. I was there every week for 5 years at the public library. So I worked with over 2,000 kids myself, and Prenda served 10,000 more in all these places, small town, North Dakota and Nebraska and Oklahoma. So we'd worked in all these settings, and I had seen, you learn, right?
Yeah.
By just being curious and watching that happen. So I had these insights, things that I knew to be true, and I was like, could we build around this? One of those things I think is really interesting is this adult, right? Like, I was basically saying, I think I'm going to just open up, like, I'll be the learning guide, this adult that cares and supports the learning process, and I'm going to open this up. How many people like me exist out in the world that it wasn't my academic skills that made me valuable there. I was able to see human beings and care about them and support them in a process. And I guess I realized, I think there's lots of them, and time has proven that many out there that do it way better than I did it. And it's amazing. It's humbling every time I meet them, because these are people that are willing to give of themselves and create this space for kids to learn. And it's the heart of an educator. It's the same thing that teachers have been doing for a very long time, just inviting more people to participate and to do it in a different way than kind of your structure that we grew up with.
At what point did you know that, like, okay, we have something here in terms of, like, there might be a business?
Yeah, probably. So I started that micro school in January of 2018. So I raised the little friends and family money. I had already quit my job, so this is what was going to allow me to not, end up bankrupt.
Were we in that round, or was it
the second
later?
Round, yeah.
Okay.
So after I had then done it for, I think, one semester, and I saw during that semester these kids, and then they came to me from a variety of backgrounds. Like my kid was, he was advanced. He was doing really well in school. We had a couple kids like that. We had kids that were struggling, that were on, various IEPs, so some learning disabilities and challenges, income levels that were different. So this group of 7 around my kitchen table, I'm looking around and saying, for each one of these kids, they're going from a state of disengagement, frustration, armor, I can't do this, to a state of, I can learn anything in the world. And you see that happen. You can see it in the eyes of a kid. It's like, holy cow, like this is huge. Basically at that point I was like, I've got to figure out a way to devote my whole life to just replicating this moment for as many kids as possible, and especially those that aren't going to get it in any other way, right? So
that's awesome.
That was the goal. And so at that point it was like clear to me we needed to make it work. And then a little while later we started working out some of the details, and thankfully a team started to sort of, I'd love to say I went out and found the team, and in a lot of ways they found me, and we created a little core group of people that were working on this, and
wow,
yeah, the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, what's funny is that like when you did the round where we participated, like I still didn't fully understand what it was, but like, can I just say I don't really like you, because you're like the most likable person everyone I've ever talked to is like loves you so much. And we were just like Kelly fans, right? Like we're like, what, it sort of doesn't matter if you want to try something.
You and Ladan actually said those words.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder, like, maybe I shouldn't take their money. Like,
why?
Well, that's not a great reason to give someone money. Like, I wanted you to catch the vision and be excited about it.
But the funny thing is that ultimately it's really hard to describe a startup in such a way that other people can be just as excited about it.
Absolutely.
So like to some degree, founders, one of the things that I think founders need to understand is that they're probably selling themselves even more so than the idea.
Right.
Because like, imagine if you were selling the idea of Twitter. You're like, I'm gonna create this thing where you could just say the status of what you're thinking at any time. Right. Like, I mean, that would be the dumbest idea ever, right? Like, who would fund that, right? But like if you met Jack, maybe you sort of get, to know the person, the personality behind it, and you're like, okay, like I like this guy. I have no clue what the hell he's talking about, but like that's how we felt about you and what motivated us to invest. So now you have a real business in 2018. You're kind of getting the glimpse of it.
Right.
At what point did things start to happen? Like, and I want to like separate out the moments of COVID, pre-COVID sort of success versus post-COVID, because I presume
COVID's chapter 3. So we just did chapter 1, kind of getting to this point where we sort of took this big leap. We learned something really interesting, and then I became obsessed with, we've got to bring this to the world. Then started kind of going out and talking to folks like you guys and others. And if anyone's watching, like, thank you for participating and believing in this. January of 2019 was another kind of breaking point. So I had been doing it now for 2 semesters. The first one was me and 7 kids around my table. The next semester, Becca and Haley, 2 of my friends, were running micro schools in different houses in town. So we now have 25 kids doing micro schools. And again, same thing. I'm seeing these kids, that like light in their eyes, that fire. These kids believed that they could learn anything. And I'm looking at them and thinking, you literally can. And if you want to like cure cancer or old age or take us to Mars or like whatever you want to do, like this is maybe this feels like a cop-out. Like, this is my way of like solving all the world's problems. It's like, let's just tell these kids that they can do it and give them the tools, and literally they're going to do it. Like,
that's awesome.
If they can believe that. And I think there's a lot of voices in their lives that are telling them not to believe that and to think differently. But it's awesome to see. So anyway, that year was about sort of learning it, of becoming very, I don't know, like convicted on this topic. And then from January on, it was it was like, oh, this is going to scale. This is going to work. And so that was when we raised the money. I started with a pitch contest in Utah, actually. So we have some connections that have. I had met the guys who are now Album VC, Peak Ventures at the time, and I kind of messaged them like, "What do you think? Would this fit? Like, should I apply to this thing?" And they were like, "Yeah, it's mostly Utah companies, but I applied to this pitch contest. It was like 100 companies or something, and I win the contest. So it's this dramatic moment on stage where I'm like sounding just as crazy as I do right now because I had this very internal, conviction that there's something here and it's going to be huge, and not just like we're going to make so much money. It's like there's a real like mission here we can accomplish.
Right. We're going to like teach so many kids, not we're going to make so much money.
Yeah, exactly. And it will grow to be like a very successful organization in the process. But I think that moment, and Sid from Album kind of stood up there. He was one of the judges and said, you know what? Sometimes as investors, you got to take a big swing, and this is crazy, but we've picked you to be the winner of the. So that came with some funding, and there was an angel from California who had been involved in charter schools that brought in just so much expertise and knowledge. His name's John Danner. Really helped me a lot, and as part of that same time, some local folks, and just getting the right kind of people that believe in it and that can help you build it up. We did Y Combinator that summer, so that was kind of all part of that sort of launch as a business process.
Okay.
And then so then that was, we went from the 7 kids to 25 kids to 100 kids to, I think by the end of that year, maybe 400 kids or something like that.
By the end of 2019, you had 400 kids.
Something like that, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, it must have been more, because I think we had about 1,000 when COVID really kicked in March. So maybe
COVID was a few months later,
yeah.
so maybe.
And so then COVID came along, and everyone in the world all of a sudden was like thinking about this and wondering, like, what's great, what's a good situation for my children,
Right.
And so people are forming their own pods spontaneously, and it was really a moment where everyone just came and said, hey, we would really like to do this thing that you've been working on now for a couple of years, and that was nice because we had a little bit of a head start, and we were able to be there and help families to.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So what was it like when COVID hit? Like, did you guys start getting ridiculous number of inbound inquiries, or what happened? That's exactly what happened.
So you think of Prenda as a two-sided marketplace in a lot of ways. So you have parents who are looking for a place to go. Most schools have to, if you have interest, you're going to build a building and hire staff and do this kind of 2-year process to get up and running. But Prenda, it's informal spaces right in your community. It's organized in a very hyper-local way. And so we had those parents coming in huge numbers, and then we had these learning guides, right? Like, you're going to run a micro school out of your house, and it's this matching problem. In the beginning, we had to sort of bootstrap both of those sides, but this side became so overwhelmingly powerful, the parents saying, we want this,
right?
That we would say, okay, but we don't have a learning guide in your neighborhood, and they'd be like, look, just give me a minute, and they'd make like 4 phone calls. They'd go find the best, like, former teacher, retired piano teacher, soccer coach, like music studio teacher. These people are like embedded in the communities.
Right.
Most moms will tell you, like, if you got to pick the person for
to
your
teach
kid,
your kid,
they'll know. They'll be like, oh yeah, it's her. And so those people got these phone calls, like really aggressive phone calls, please start a Prenda micro school, and they were like, what is this? And then we had a process to sort of like help them get educated, onboarded, and they're able to, we try to make it as easy as we can for them, take care of all of the busy work, the things that they wouldn't want to do. We pay them out of the money that we're receiving for the education. So they're making some money on the side, and it ends up being a really rewarding experience for them as well as for the kids that they're working with.
That is so awesome. So, one of the things that I don't understand about Prenda is how does the pay side of things work, and like public money versus private money? Like, who's paying for the education of the kids? And I want to actually dive a little bit into that because
absolutely,
there's probably some controversy in there somewhere we can talk about.
Yeah, I know. You as a journalist, you got to get to the get to the hard.
I'm hardly a journalist, and in this case, I'm biased. But
no, it's a great question. So we had a choice early on, and in fact, I had some pretty loud voices in my corner, like folks that had experience in education that were like, do not try to work inside of the system. They're like, there's problems politically and from regulatory things that it's going to be really hard to try to do this in partnership or in sort of collaboration with the existing education system. They said, skip that, go run private schools, just charge parents. They gave me numbers like, the best schools in San Francisco and New York are charging $40,000 a kid per year. There's a lot of them that are like in the $20,000 to $25,000 range. There's, maybe like the lower end private schools, it's $10,000 a year. So if you could like shoot for a number like that, you could run a great operation and make a ton of money and spread this. You'll find plenty of people. And I definitely looked at it. I mean, we had a whole moment where me and the small team, considered all of this. At the end of the day, it was like, I mean, sounds weird to say. Like, in my growing up in middle-class Arizona, like, I literally didn't know anyone that paid for school. It just wasn't. It wasn't part of my world or my ecosystem. Yeah. I didn't want.
If you were making better education available to rich people, then like it doesn't help the sort of society as a whole.
You look back at it at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we did some good for kids, and I like all kids, so I'm not like discriminating against kids based on the income of their parents. But if somebody needs it, like it's hard to argue that that's the place to really focus. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, it was like if we believe what we're doing and that this is going to do good for kids, we need to make it accessible to everybody. So we made this deliberate decision from basically the beginning, so that even that first 7 microschool students, we're going to work through existing schools. So we're going to partner. We'll find the allies inside of the system. We'll work out partnerships, and we'll make this available through the funding that's already there for education so that it's free to the families. That families don't have to ever pay for Prenda. That's the goal.
That's awesome.
We've since deviated a little bit from that. We have states where we haven't been able to find partners, and people pay us for the curriculum just to do it like with their own kids at home. But our main focus by far is let's make this free and accessible for as many people as we can get it to. And that means working through partners, right? And we know folks at school districts and charter schools, and we understand there's a variety of kind of programs that are supporting school choice and these options. We don't have a political agenda in this. Our goal is to bring this to as many kids as we can. And so in the process of that, we've had to, get flexible, but holding to that, like, let's make this tuition free and make this available, especially in these communities where, there's not a lot of options.
So is school choice something that has to be in place in order for this program to be free for students?
No. So that's one of the things that's really nice about it. And we have worked through, for example, we have some partners coming up. They're not all public yet, but where we're working actually through a district school that's able to just sign up kids, really inside of their geography, but also outside of their geography. So there's folks in kind of the traditional education system as well as charter schools, which that's kind of one of these, you debate whether that counts as school choice or not, but that's an institution that's been around for a while. And then there's
the charter school system.
Right.
Okay.
And then you have these additional programs where it's let's just give you $5,000 and or $7,000 or whatever the number, and go choose whatever school you want. Kid. Yeah. What do
you think is the best solution in this whole? Is that too controversial to say?
No,
or?
I mean it's a part of it is just I'm not. It's a very complicated topic. The politics of this, it just gets messy, and there's a lot that people at the surface don't understand. So I think there's I refrain from opining on the education policy.
Do you think there's good valid arguments on all sides of this issue?
I think there's, for by and large. Now there are definitely folks in this world on all the sides that are obsessed with money and power, and it has nothing to do with kids, and that's a shame. That really hurts my feelings because it's this is not what education should be. Right. But there are also on all sides there are people that are in it for the right reasons. We're talking about the same thing, and it's beautiful actually to be able to sit down with somebody that maybe comes from a place that they would assume we would be enemies or adversarial. We talk about our shared focus on helping kids in these communities, and they're able to say, I want that too. And I say, yes, that's what I want.
The shared goal is creating kids that are amazing and feel like they can do anything accomplish anything.
We call it empowered learners. That's
empowered learners. Yeah, that's the mission.
Yep.
I love it.
It's a 2-word mission statement. It's easy to remember. Yeah.
That's really cool. We could probably talk about Prenda for a lot longer. We
Sure.
could talk about other aspects of education if you want. But if you're ready for another subject,
Let's go. Whatever, yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about nuclear physics. You went to school for physics.
Yeah.
Brigham Young. Where you're doing your
I was
undergrad.
working on lasers for undergrad, yeah.
Okay.
And then tokamak for grad school. Yeah. My dad, so if you want the story on this, I
Yeah.
don't know if that's what you want.
Yeah.
I liked everything. I really, I was just one of those kids, I was interested in lots of things. I was annoying because I would ask questions that weren't on the curriculum or whatever. Like teachers, I don't know. It'd be interesting if any of my teachers were watching this, but I don't think I was like well liked by my teachers. I was definitely not. I got good grades. I was, doing well in school, but it was sort of like I had my separate life, right? I had my school life and then my learning life, and so much of my learning was actually like hands-on.
On your own?
Yeah, like creating stuff. We were engineering projects. We were doing like starting businesses always. Me and my friend made a rap album when we were 10, like
Really?
oh yeah.
Do you know how to rap?
No.
Wait, what's your favorite rap song?
Oh, of actual rap?
Yeah.
I think like Drake's. I just know like some of the
Like if a song came on right now on the radio, which song would you be like singing along to?
Yeah, like
because I'd love to see you rap.
Oh, see, I surprise people. Yeah, like God's Plan by Drake. I think it's just a cool song. I don't know.
How does it go?
My favorite line in this is, she says, "Do you love me?" I tell her only partly. I only love my bed and my mama. I'm sorry. It's just like. Anyway, so that's embarrassing me a little bit.
No,
you
that's
expected
awesome.
Vanilla Ice out of me, didn't you?
Well, I mean, who can go wrong with Ice Ice Baby?
No, I mean, so anyway, that's a way sidetrack, but I've always been a learner. I didn't really have this like connection with school, right? Where
Okay.
learning equals school for me, it just wasn't true. School equals school and learning is different. And so when I got to college, this was my moment, right? I was
Right.
like, college, I can learn anything I want. This is amazing. And they asked me the first day, like, what's your major? I called my dad, like, what should I major in? Like, I want to do everything. I want to do like Russian literature, and I want to do economics, and I want to do something, creative writing, all these things that I thought would be fun. And he's like, well, do something like technical, and then you can always kind of like go back and do the other stuff
Right.
later. So I was like, all right, that was like enough of a reason for me. It's like statistics or physics, and the physics program was better, And,
Oh, nice.
And so I did the physics, and I've actually, I was really glad I did. You learn a ton in physics, and I found out about myself that I'm very much like a first principles thinker. Like I always want to drill down to why.
Right.
Biology always bothered me, for example, because you're like memorizing all these things, but I'd be like, well, why does that happen? Like, how does the
Right.
mitochondria work? And it's like, well, it just does. Like, shut up. Stop asking.
Right. We don't know is the answer.
Somebody knows, but it
Yeah.
actually took me until grad school when I made friends with the PhD students in, like bio, whatever, that they could actually explain to me like the physical process by which energy was being, anyway.
Converted. Yeah.
So, so I started with physics because of that. BYU in Utah is a predominantly undergrad. So there's not grad students that, if you go to like a research institution, Stanford or Harvard or something, the grad students do all the fun stuff, right? They get to do the work. At BYU, there's not a lot of grad students. And so my professor was talking about something in one of these big lecture halls. I remember him explaining his research.
Okay.
And I was like, that sounds cool. Like he's working on high energy lasers, and they were like amplifying it so much and doing these like Fourier transform, like pulse compression things. And so he was able to etch like or diagnose etchings that were smaller than like wavelengths of light. So the future of computer chips, is going to be smaller and smaller. He's working on this stuff. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. So I just walked up to him. I was like, hey, do you need any help?
Awesome.
And they have these like low paying jobs. They're like research assistant.
Right.
But I didn't realize even that it was like a career move. I just thought I was, getting a job that I could get paid and make some money and have some fun. So he did. That was a sophomore in college, and I did it for 3 years. By the time I ended up getting into MIT and going, and I showed up the first day, my research advisor's like, okay, so let's talk about your research background. It became very obvious to me that like the only reason I got in
Was because of that.
because I had like hands-on built laser systems.
Wow.
And so this project was a toroidal-shaped vacuum chamber, bigger than this room, and with tons of magnetic fields and all this like microwave radiation getting like pumped into a very small amount of deuterium gas that's supposed to like get excited and then smash into each other, and the molecules, the ions that smash into each other fuse, right? And then it kicks out a bunch of like high energy neutrons, and you get basically the nuclear reaction that's happening on the surface of the sun, but it's happening in a like very small quantity in a lab, a controlled environment. So this is the project that all of us are working on. There's like 100 people working on this. And my project with my advisor, Jim Irby, who's awesome, was let's build a laser system that traverses that plasma and measures the magnetic field in a particular direction. So when I got there, he's like, wait, so you've built lasers before? I'm like, well, I guess. I mean, I spent the last 3 years like working on lasers. It wasn't like I felt like an expert, you know?
Right.
But that's not zero. And he was like, perfect. Like, here's the plans. Here's kind of what we want to do. And you need to like go shopping, basically. Like order, it's like
whatever you want.
$1 million budget for, I'm like, brand new grad student.
Yeah.
Here's $1 million. Go order all the like optics, the laser itself, every single component, and the table, and like assemble the whole thing. And then all the electronics that like measure it, detect everything, and then plug it into the data recorders, and then we're going to process the data. So it's basically like the experiment had been sort of sketched out, but I got to be the one that like placed all the orders, like unboxed everything, like took it out.
Put it all together.
Put it all on the laser table.
Did you try it on the moon to see if you can cut the moon?
It didn't occur to me to do that. I tried it.
You got to cut the moon with the laser, right?
I tried it inadvertently on my own hand a couple times.
Are you serious?
It was a high energy laser. It's like, we didn't have it focused all the way down, but it could have like, yeah. So they use it for cutting like metals and stuff. This is like a CO2 like powerful industrial laser, but we had it, thankfully, not quite like that. But, you're in there, and you've got your big dorky goggles on, and you're testing. It's infrared, so you can't see the laser beam.
Wow.
So the way you find out where the laser is you put these little cards in, and they're like, you're looking at the spot on the card, and if you get your hand just in the wrong spot, it's like, yeah!
Oh, wow.
These, like, it's this pulsed sensation, so it's like, and sometimes you'd see these, like, dots, like, as you moved your hand, like, through the...
Oh, wow.
Anyway, it's stupid and fun, and thankfully my eyes are in check. I had a friend that... stupidly took off his glasses and then had some permanent damage on his sight. So that can happen. But yeah, it survived, made it out. And grateful to have, obviously, you learn a ton in a setting like that. It's just high-paced, high-frequency. This culture of like what like Brene Brown would call like radical candor, or some of these people would say. MIT's great at that, right? There's no thought to like slowing down about someone's feelings to the point where it's like actually toxic and negative. But
right, they're gone the other extreme.
Yeah, but to be able to do that, to be that direct and that just willing to challenge and engage on the merits of the idea, taking away this sense of like personal identity connected to it. I mean, it's a pretty impressive thing, and in some ways, like I long for that again, because I think we as a society have gotten to the point where you actually can't really talk about a lot of things, and it becomes
like you can't say something is stupid based on its merit because you don't want to hurt the person's feelings.
Right. It's like 3 + 4 is 7, and they're like, no, it's not. It's like, well,
right.
Yeah, but, almost. Anyway, so
most likely it's 7. Just to calm things down.
Well, yeah, maybe I don't know if your viewers, if anybody's disagreeing with it, but anyway, so it was fascinating. Like what I loved.
But besides lasers, you were also doing nuclear.
So we were using the laser for nuclear physics, basically.
Okay.
So what's happening in that toroidal vacuum chamber is ions fusing together. It's a nuclear reaction. It's spitting out high energy neutrons. And
what was it being used for? Like generating power? Or?
Yeah. I mean, we weren't generating any power. Spoiler alert, fusion doesn't work. But we were generating power. We were generating a lot less than what we were using.
Putting it.
And yeah.
So the idea behind what's the idea behind fusion is that like you can get it moving, and then once it gets moving, it can generate power from what, water, or like I don't really fully understand. No worries.
So like a chemical reaction would be you have like molecule combined together. The electrons of those molecules rearrange themselves, and so they become something else. Like think wood and air and heat, and it turns into charcoal and more heat, right? And then that heat can sort of spark the reaction and continue more burning. And so that's a fire that I just described.
Yeah.
Well, on the surface of the sun, you have hydrogen gas, various isotopes of hydrogen that are so hot that the atoms themselves don't stay together. So the electrons have been kicked off. So you have high energy, positively charged ions, the nucleus, and then you have a bunch of free electrons kind of floating around too. So that means everything's got a charge, and it's obeying electromagnetic laws, right? So if you put a magnetic field, you can get those particles to follow along the magnetic field, that you can kind of manipulate them that way.
Okay.
And so on the surface of the sun, it's so massive that gravity just does all the work and kind of holds everything in place. But
for free, in a way.
Yeah, it's just like, that's just what happens. But we want to get that same nuclear reaction
Without gravity.
And so the way to do that is like these various magnetic configurations where you're trying to sort of like hold on to that really hot, positively charged ion long enough that it will collide into another one, and then that becomes something else. And the end result of that reaction, so you think like deuterium plus heat equals like alpha particle plus more heat, like gamma radiation and high energy neutrons. So you kind of like, you can do the nuclear physics to sort of show that that's true. And then the question is, how do you sort of like hang on to the whole thing long enough to get these reactions to go?
Yeah.
You need enough of them to go so that they can trigger.
Power the magnets and have extra energy, essentially, right?
You wouldn't believe. Like, so there's the room with the experiment.
Okay.
And then there's next door to it, like a warehouse of capacitor banks. We used more energy every 10 minutes. So we basically fired a shot, like ran the experiment every 10 minutes.
Okay.
So just charge up. We used the amount of power that the city of Cambridge uses every day.
Oh my God.
Every 10 minutes.
Wow.
Right? Like our separate substations, tons of electricity. It's like, it's all just piling up in these capacitor banks. And then when it runs, that electricity is being used to drive the magnetic fields, but also to pump in to energize the molecules or the ions in just the right way.
Right.
So all this stuff you're basically investing tons, and then you're getting out, a few like hot neutrons or something. But the goal of that project wasn't no one thought that we were close to getting more energy out than in. They've taken the learnings from that and other projects, and now they're building another one, multinational kind of collaboration in France. And I have some friends that are still involved with it. And the hope is that with this bigger geometry, you get closer to kind of like power neutral. It's still not a power plant, but they think they're close. I mean, they always say it's about 25 years away, or 50,
it's been 25 years away for like
50
years or so. Speaking of nuclear, though, like what about traditional nuclear power? Like, are you for that, or like do you feel like the nuclear waste is too dangerous, or potential of nuclear disaster is too dangerous for us to be like replacing carbon-based stuff with nuclear?
Yeah, it's a great question. And here again, it's like this is it's more complicated than fusion, right? If you get fusion to work, it's literally seawater. There's no nuclear waste. You could run this thing basically forever and ever, and there's no problems, right? I mean, economics are tricky, but I think that could be solved, right? So it's
right. As soon as you get free energy, economics can be solved.
So fusion's what I was working on, and that one is a no-brainer, but it doesn't work.
Right.
Fission works today. So fission is a different nuclear reaction where you start with a big, like unstable nucleus, and you break it into two smaller pieces, and you get energy out from that.
Right.
That split.
That's like uranium or like all the
uranium,
sort of
plutonium. And then you take those like thorium and radon and some of these things that come out after you've split that. And like you're talking about, those things are still like gradually radioactive decay, right, over time. So they're spitting off like beta particles and gamma rays and stuff that people don't want to be
near.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
but you capture that somehow, right? Like
right. So there's places to do it. There's ways to do it. There's been proposals. There's this like kind of political phenomena. So this quickly switches over from science to politics, because where are you going to put the waste? Like,
right.
There was a big project when I was there. This was, 2005, 6, 7 that
at MIT,
where they were talking about Yucca Mountain, this place in Nevada where they were going to dig out just a giant cave and just put all the waste there. And there's this concept called NIMBY, like not in my backyard. Right. And NIMBYism is a huge problem with nuclear, right? Like nobody wants to be. It's like we all want the electricity that it creates, but we don't want to be near it, And then in 2011, another big blow for nuclear, because the plant in Japan, when the tsunami and the earthquake and the plant leaked, and so there were some
the Fukushima or whatever plant.
Fukushima. Yeah. So you had countries like that day, the Parliament of Germany was like, we will never do nuclear again. Just on sort of a reaction to that. So these are hard. I mean, they're not issues that I pretend to be an expert on. I think what I would love for there to be is maybe just a better understanding, like shared understanding of like what it is that's going on. Things like well, you could steal the waste and make a bomb. Like there's things like that. That's like, no, like
you can't do that.
I mean, you could make something out of it, but and like to the level that it's like scarier that should be even on your top 100 fears is low, but it doesn't seem to matter.
Like a machine gun is just as deadly as
way more. Yeah, like
yeah. So you know, like a lot of these things that we send to explore the planets are like using nuclear power
Sure.
that you know, like the power lasts for decades, right? Like Voyager 1 and 2, they're on nuclear power. I was like reading about that, and it's like 30, 40, what is it, 40 years since Voyagers have gone out. Like, they still have power to like, and they're so far away from the sun that solar would have been impossible for them. So the technology to create these like relatively small units that generate power for decades long is there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, do you think that if we had continued nuclear research, we could have gotten to a point where every house gets like a refrigerator size little plant outside their house that like would power the house for 100 years or something? Or
so that's a really good question. I think it's important to understand, like on these spacecraft, what we're really doing is directing the random emission of particles off of something. So there's basically like you take a radioactive piece of material.
Okay.
There's so much of that exists in the world naturally, and you can create more of it. So you have this radioactive piece, and it's just going to start spitting off at random intervals. They have this thing called half-life. Like, it takes 50 years for half of this material to like decay itself away. So you pick something with a long half-life, you know sort of what its radioactive product is, and then it's just Newton's laws. It's like you spit off, an alpha particle in this direction, it gives you a little boost in this direction.
In the opposite direction,
so,
right.
And in space, the beautiful thing is there's no...
you don't have to worry
friction,
about that.
So it doesn't take tons, right, to like kind of keep it going.
But they're generating power too, right? Like in Voyager case, like it's 500 watts of constant power for 50 years. You know what I mean, like that's just
so you have to figure out ways to sort of do that. I think that technology itself to do at any sort of scale. I mean, 500 watts seems like a lot, but you would use it.
Yeah, no. I mean, 500 watts obviously isn't enough, but like that's 50 years ago's technology, right? Like I'm just wondering, like, would we, if nuclear research had been like completely?
So here's the problem, though. There's like some physics limits on that that like haven't actually changed. Like, and you can engineer as much as you want, but like you're not like getting more than 500 watts out of something like that. Maybe you get 600 or something. It's not.
But could you get it small enough to where you could like put 20 of those together and power a house, right? Like.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but what I would guess is no. I think it's you basically are switching over at that point to fission. So that's where you start thinking about a fundamentally different reaction. So instead of spontaneously spitting off particles, now you're thinking about you're thinking about actually like dividing
the atoms,
larger nuclei into smaller pieces, and that is a different thing where the economies of scale, like you actually, it wouldn't make sense to have one for every house. It would be much better to have all of it centralized, and then NIMBYism is easier that way, but it's still hard. So
you were going to MIT for nuclear physics. You come out, like what's your first job? Is it in physics or nuclear physics, or did you just completely shift to like marketing? And because when I met you, you had already shifted to some like product marketing type of.
Do you want the long version or the
whatever you think is
nuclear? So fusion energy, for all the reasons we just talked about, is this like silver bullet, like amazing thing. Every time we would have a talk at the Plasma Science and Fusion Center that's working on fusion, it would like all the energy problems. We're gonna greenhouse gas emissions, and we're running out of fossil fuels and SOx and NOx and all these like toxic chemicals in the air, and energy security problems leading to geopolitical conflict, all the problems with energy. And then the last slide was like, and therefore fusion, it's like we need, it was like, and everyone's excited to be working on fusion. But I kind of like got cynical because I'm looking around, I'm like, we're not even like close to solving these problems. And by the way, you were very convincing telling me about the problems, right?
Right.
And meanwhile, I'm spending like hours and hours in a room by myself with a laser, or hours and hours like sitting there writing code that like analyzes results. I'm not interacting with people, and I was just kind of like, I was talking to the laser. I just needed like, I needed something different, in my life. And so it was at that point that that I I just kind of was like, maybe I'm not a researcher. Maybe I like my dad's advice to sort of ride it as long as you can. Like I had gotten to this interesting spot, but it was like, oh, now I would actually like to go use skills that I have to sort of solve problems that matter today to real people in a way that's like more human for me. And so I left and worked in energy. So basically I was working on in like different ends of the energy spectrum. Like fusion is like highly technological solution that's going to solve all the problems. I was working in energy efficiency and like clean tech, smart grid. Like we were just going into like a commercial building and figuring out like, oh, look, you could do these really obvious things that would save a bunch of energy, and then we wouldn't have to build all the coal power plants. You know, it's like stuff like that. I was working for a lot of electric utilities, and it was consulting for a while, and then I worked for a big kind of Fortune 500 that was doing work for commercial buildings. So I got to work on the Empire State Building and the Willis Tower in Chicago and some of these like iconic skyscrapers, and putting together plans for them to basically use energy better and smarter ways, saves them money, and it also happens to help the planet. So it made a lot of sense for me, and that was the field where I spent all that time kind of doing some engineering work, but also kind of marketing and product management work as well.
Oh, interesting. And what's funny is that like energy savings can be so huge. I just tweeted something about like the energy usage of EVs. If like the entire fleet of cars became EVs tomorrow, we'd need another 127,000 megawatts of electrical power generation, right? And then somebody responded, or we could just replace all the refrigerators or something, because the old refrigerators are so inefficient that the new refrigerators would save us about 127,000 megawatts of electricity.
True. It's crazy.
And I was like, whoa, if that's true, that's insane.
Yeah, well, I'd have to do the numbers to like verify.
Yeah, of course, but like...
So we definitely did programs, like working for PG&E and some of these electric utilities in California, where we literally did that. We were like, if we just pay people to like change out their fridge, so we would do, it was like, appliance recycling. If you just give us your old refrigerator, we'll buy it from you for $100 and we'll come pick it up. So it makes your life like super easy. And running programs like that, it was like by far the cheaper way to save energy. Like, so then we didn't have, like the utility didn't have to go out and build more power plants, because they were every time they did one, they were saving. So it was an interesting way to think about, you know, for the most part, you think of a utility as like, we want to build and sell electricity, but it was accomplishing the same thing, but just in a different way. So it was fascinating to work there. We talked for a long time about all of that.
That's awesome. Hang on one second. It's a little hot in here. Can I ask you to? Sorry. Thanks, Adrian.
I was like, what does this
this means maybe we can turn the Nest.
Oh, that's funny. Seems like you should be able to just talk to it by now.
I know, but it probably would be confused like Alexa. You know. All right. So, such fascinating discussion. So now, I guess we covered you coming out of school and working on these other companies before you started Prenda. What are your interests? Like, what do you do with your kids? How many kids do you have, by the way?
4 kids.
4 kids?
Yeah.
And how old are they?
My oldest is 16.
Okay.
So I have boys that are 16 and 13, and girls that are 11 and 9.
How do you get along with your 16-year-old boy? Because I have a 15-year-old.
It's just got personal.
Yeah, totally.
When we get along the best is, and I can say this because I know your son, and I think our 2 boys are actually pretty similar, is just going down, like allowing him to sort of drive, like to the whenever you can, right? I think parents so often just get stuck in these like ruts. Or I know I do, where I'm just trying to I'm trying to push him, like, do your chores, do your homework, like, don't do that. And you have to do those things, and you have to be there as a parent. But the times where we're really clicking is where he's asking me questions, we're talking. There's little glimpses, right? 16, it's hard to see anything in your dad that's, like, great, or good. But there's little glimpses where he's, like, asking maybe a follow-up question about something in my past or present, where it's like, oh, like my dad might actually be like an interesting, decent human being, and and you can't play that off or like call attention to it. But no, I don't pretend to have it figured out. We have I'm really lucky. He's a sweet kid, and we have a great relationship, and he's so clever. Like I love to see. Well, you have a YouTuber, like I love to see the moments where like he's created something that I never would have conceived of, and it's just genuine delight to see that happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. What is your like favorite things to do family wise? Like this past year has been kind of hard with
Yeah.
COVID and everything. Like what do you guys do?
We love going on trips together. So yeah, there's COVID fun, right? We like movies. We like I'm trying to think. Like I'll play chess with them, but I always beat them. I can't seem to like. I'm kind of like playing.
You can't
this
like
thing.
lower your skill level.
Yeah,
a
well,
little
because
bit.
I feel like it would be dishonest to like.
Right.
Anyway, and I did that once with my wife when she was learning chess, and she beat me and has never played me since. So,
how funny.
She like figured it out like halfway through the game, and by then I like didn't have a queen and stuff. So it was like, and she wins, and then she's like, okay, done. Like literally to this day, never. This is when we were dating, and now
Right.
we've never played. No, I'm just kidding. So we like to play games together. We love like some of the newer kind of strategy games. Traveling. There's like a kind of a running joke. This is like multi-generational because my dad was always like, you want to go on a hike? And everyone's like, ugh. And now I'm like, let's go hiking. And everyone's like, eh. But every once in a while, like, hey, this is happening this Saturday. Like, I'm going to go to this hike. And they know that like we'll go to breakfast after. So they're like interested in it enough to do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How going back to Prenda, by the way, how big is Prenda?
How many people?
Yeah.
Or revenue or what?
Well,
yeah.
any of it that you're willing to discuss, actually.
Yeah, we have 70 full-time
Holy
and
cow.
about another like 30 or 40 that are like contractors. So the interesting thing about Prenda is, like I kind of mentioned this, it grew in the way that like a planet is born in a solar system. It was just very like, there was this idea that drew me and it drew other people. And so like Katie joined and she had a deep background in helping kids learn how to read, and she's driving our academics and our learning model. And Rochelle came along and was like, she's done sales roles and has done that before. She was like, this is going to explode. We're going to get this to everybody. And
That's
so
awesome.
they almost like came that way. And Prenda, obviously now runs hiring processes. And please, if you're watching, like we need people. So I know every guest probably says that, but building that team has always had this element of like, it's just this like group of people that really rally around what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's been just such a huge like blessing. And as I, interact, like we weekly all hands, we're all on Zoom and everybody sees each other. And it's just like, I just feel this overwhelming like gratitude, not only with the fact that these people are here, but like who these people are and what they show up with.
Was there sort of like with companies growing, there's always these inflection points of like hitting like 20 employees is different than, when you're 10.
Yeah.
Like is 50 different than 20? Like what are those numbers, do you think, that like you had to start doing things differently? You just mentioned one of them, which is like we have hiring processes, right?
Yeah.
Like you probably didn't when you were 20,
Absolutely
right?
not.
Like,
yeah.
so
we didn't have hierarchy. We didn't have an org chart, right? So that was I remember sitting there with maybe 15 people. So something like that. We were sitting in our little space that I still rent over in downtown Mesa for $25 a month or whatever. And we were sitting around classrooms and had the whiteboard up, and it was like, what should our values be? It was very much like a very collaborative, flat.
we should have good values.
Yeah. We knew we stood for something, but that process of like getting it out, like, well, what is this actually like? How would you say that in words? And it was a fascinating process. And we ended up, I'm actually really grateful for it because to a large extent, like Prenda has always been bigger than me. It's, even when it was just me doing it, it was, other, outside advisors, friends, the kids themselves, like there's all these inputs into, what a company ultimately becomes. And
Right.
so just being part of that. But yeah, so hierarchy, like having to learn leadership and management, how to proactively build culture in the opposite order. So the culture was first, leadership and sort of an org chart.
Yeah.
And then we had to like look more systematically at policies and HR and people and how are we treating folks and are we doing this, in a way that's kind of consistent, defensible.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm learning, fundraising and politics and, all
Speaking
this,
of
this outside stuff.
Fundraising, you also raised a round last year.
We did. Yeah, we raised a Series A last year, led by Learn Capital. So that's an awesome ed tech investor based in California.
Okay.
They've been involved in companies like Coursera, who's done a bunch of work in higher ed.
They're about to go public, right?
Coursera is, yes. They're
Okay.
having a good year.
Yeah.
These guys have been really great partners. Just they understand education at a very deep level. They're connected to everybody, and they've been super helpful to us.
How much did you guys raise?
We raised $5 million.
And is that going to get you, like, are you guys profitable now, or like?
Not yet, and we'll probably raise again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like there's a lot of room for growth, right? Like because you're focused on growth, you can sort of invest in that. And
there's just so much to build. We look ahead of us at the mission, and it's really exciting. And then it's like, oh, but we have to actually like do that work. It's almost like you've got like Mount Fuji ahead of you, and you're like, imagine how great it would be to be standing up on top of Mount Fuji. But then it's like, oh crap, I've got to climb Mount Fuji to for that to be true. And yeah, thankfully it's people that I wouldn't trade. It's like doing it together and being there with a team.
Yeah.
I know people. I've heard like entrepreneurs and business people talk about this before, but like when you're there, it's like the level to which you rely on each other and the feeling of like
really close.
Collectiveness. Yeah, In fact, I remember a day where you like bought a car or something for one of the people on your team.
Yeah.
And I was like, literally, like
Dan.
it was
I love
incomprehensible to me. It was like, how could you ever? But like, I get it. I'm not saying that I'm buying cars from. But just this level of like, you just feel this like.
All Prenda employees will get a Tesla. They have to. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll buy you my car, which is a $3,000. I drive a very old Toyota Avalon. It's a '96, so it's doing great. No, but yeah, just the feeling of like gratitude and mutual, like there's this strength that you draw from each other. And, I
totally
definitely feel so grateful.
Like I've obviously never been in actual battle, but the terminology is that you're in battle together, right? Like, and you get close because you're spending like significant amounts of time together with these people, and
and pressure, right?
And pressure, yeah.
And
you're trying to accomplish something together, which that sense of accomplishment is also shared and distributed, and it's really cool.
It's real, yeah. It's one of the great. I didn't see it coming, and I tell my team this a lot, that I was kind of like surprised by that. Like I knew from that first micro school how I was going to feel about helping kids learn, and that has continued, right? So every time I set up micro school visits, and I get to go at Indian reservations at small towns and all different parts of the state, and we have a partnership with the Black Mothers Forum in inner city Phoenix, and working together with these amazing people, and I get to see these kids, and that same thing holds true every time. It's like, yes, like you are moving towards empowered learner, and every time I see it, I never get tired of it.
That's awesome.
And then the thing that surprises me is like right behind that, but maybe tied. I mean, it's like up there is just this feeling of gratitude and astonishment at the people, the adults that step up and volunteer to not volunteer, but like that choose to devote their time and energy and gifts and work on this with you. And you just feel so just overwhelmed. With gratitude with who these people are. And anyway, I feel very grateful.
That's awesome. So how many open positions right now at Prenda?
Probably 12, maybe 12.
Yeah.
We're software developers, please. Anybody?
So, what would be your guess in terms of like this time next year? Are you guys like double that number, or?
I would say we will be double. I don't know the exact figures, but it'll be 150 people, something like that. So I guess that's pretty close to.
That's amazing.
Pretty close to double. There's lots to do, lots of work, and we feel grateful we've been able to. We've done a lot of this work right here in Arizona, but we've crossed now over, and so we're doing work in multiple states, and that's been really fun too.
I can't imagine that success happening to a better guy.
I appreciate it.
Congratulations on all that, Kelly. It's awesome. It's awesome to see it as a cheerleader on the side. I'm glad to be a small little tiny part of it, or like Lotta and I are both glad to be a tiny little part of it, of that journey. Anything else you want to talk about?
I think I pretty much hit the empower learners piece pretty hard. I never get tired of that, but let's give your listeners a break. Yeah. No, this is great. I appreciate you letting me be here. It's fun to talk.
It's my pleasure. Anytime. And if you want to come back, if I didn't scare you away, we could talk about more nuclear physics if you want. Or
well, next time I want to ask you questions about building software businesses from scratch. So.
Well, now you're the expert on it. I have no idea anymore. You guys are the new generation of kids building, software companies that I know nothing about now. So
pretty awesome.
Yeah, super awesome. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Hamid.
All right, man. Take care. Bye.